Hello. How to communicate about climate change is what I'd like to share with you. Welcome to A to Zig, the Slippery Slope, Program H. I'm Ziggy Kozicki, and I would like to share some things with you that might be helpful. In particular, talking about climate change, what it is, and what we can all learn from this whole experience we're going through. So what is climate change? Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. And climate change can be natural. And since the 1800s, however, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, which produces heat-trapping gases. And we know that many of these things are actually the gift from the dinosaurs. So anyways, moving on to this idea of climate change being something that we should be concerned about, we all can understand this thing called greenhouse gases that go up in the atmosphere. It causes climate change, and we're usually talking about carbon dioxide and methane. Now, recently, many people were exposed to another kind of particulate matter that ended up in the atmosphere because of fires that were taking place around the globe. So there are some gases mixed in with that, but the kind of gases we're talking about are really the kind that we're most concerned about. And how does this happen? Well, clearing the land and cutting down forests also increases carbon dioxide. So whenever you see clear cutting in forests in the Amazon or in Canada or whatever being cleared out, they're releasing carbon dioxide. So all of these plants that are holding the carbon, when their life is ended, basically release that carbon back in the atmosphere. So you can see some conservation of our forests is really an important part of maintaining our climate. But when we look at where the real issues are, they're in also some of the things that are important to us, like agriculture, oil and gas operations. Those are the major sources of methane emissions. Now, farmers are becoming much more conscious of methane, and there's even some attempts to try to mitigate that. But when we think of oil and gas operations, we have unbelievable amount of methane that is being released every time we do drilling and fracking and all these other kinds of things, not to mention the actual production of oil into a fuel. So the energy industry, transportation, and this is fossil fuel driven transportation, and that's why electric vehicles are becoming more popular, because this is a way to get away from that oil-based transportation system. Buildings that aren't energy efficient or in some way produce some of these kinds of problems, as well as I mentioned, agricultural land use are among the main sectors causing greenhouse gases. These are all areas that require some real delicate interventions. So let me communicate with you about climate change and talk to you about what we can do to get around to finally settling on solutions. Well, we have to build trust. And on this, we have to basically avoid having any arguments. It's very important to think about what we can do together to make this possible. And so focus on this whenever you talk with people. Try to create some trust. So what does that really mean? It means real talk. What's real talk? It's respect for your conversational partner. and trying to find some common ground. It's enjoying the conversation, actually talking in such a way that you enjoy the repertoire, the exchange of ideas. It's an opportunity to ask questions. How did you come about to believe what you believe? You know, those kinds of things. Listen and show that you've heard what the person is saying. Tell your story. Tell them, whoever they are, why you believe what you believe, and do it in a way that is empathic if possible. Talk about the actions that could make it easier for all of us, but don't try to fix everything. Just talk about possible actions. Learn from the conversations you have with people. Each time, look at it and say, what did I learn from that conversation? And keep going and keep connected with people so that this isn't just a passing fancy. It's something that you really get committed to, and it becomes part of who you are. So one of the things that can help is to talk about the obvious changes in the climate. And with this, you can even talk about things like, you know, we all want good drinking water. And we know that drinking water has been polluted over time. We'd all like to see our garbage picked up and placed in the right places, you know, so it doesn't end up being a mess for our society. We all want a safe environment for our children, grandchildren. We want a natural area as much as possible. So what can we do to deal with these issues? And I think it's really important to keep in mind that we're going to deal with climate deniers. And they're going to say things like, this is the coldest winter we've had in years. So much for global warming. Well, the response to that is there's a difference between climate and weather. Weather fluctuates day to day, in and out, whereas climate is a long-term trend. And the overall trend is indisputably that the Earth is warming and that we're getting warmer. We can measure that. So even though the climate doesn't seem sometimes to be changing in the way we think because of weather patterns, overall we know that the Earth is getting warmer. Some people might say, well, climate change is natural and normal. It's happened in other points of time in history. That's true. There have been periods of global warming and cooling throughout history. Also, we've seen some spikes and lulls in greenhouse gases that go with that during Earth's long history. But those historic increases in CO2 should be a warning to us. Each time they happen, there were serious environmental disruptions, including mass extinctions. So we know that when these kinds of things happen, when there's gases that are being emitted, these greenhouse gases, we have a problem. And that's what's happening now. And so we can measure those greenhouse gases. We have the technology, the ability to do so. And we know that we're in a serious situation right now in this world we live in. So another argument you might hear from people is that there's no consensus among scientists that climate change is real. Wow. There's nearly 100% agreement among scientists. There are some outliers, but we have to question why they're outliers. Are they being paid by the petroleum industry? Are they just bad scientists? Whatever. The general consensus by almost everyone is that, yeah, this is really happening. And the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is made up of people from all over the world, says that global warming is accelerating, and it's going to reach 1 degree centigrade above the pre-industrial levels somewhere around 2030, maybe sooner, we're seeing possibility. So it's a full decade earlier than previously forecast, and now we're maybe even cutting that in half. So this is accelerating. This is not something that's decelerating or staying stable. We're really having to be more conscious of the fact that maybe we don't have as much time as we think we do. because that's always been the kind of mentality. Kick it down the road, let the next generation deal with it. The next generation, by the way, is not happy having to deal with it. You know, Generation X, Y, and Z aren't very happy about the idea that this is going to be dumped in their lap. So plants and animals can adapt is also an argument you hear a lot of. There's some truth to that, but mostly it's wrong. Human-caused climate change is happening so rapidly, specifically in various parts of the world, that species don't have time to adapt. You know, trees, animals, you know, frogs, whatever, they need time. They need time to adapt. They might need 100 years, 1,000 years. Up north in northern Michigan, for instance, we see that trees are starting to die. Why is that? Because the temperature has changed just a little bit, and the gases have changed just a little bit. They don't have time to adapt, and so what's happening? You see birch trees, for instance, white birch trees, that are passing away. Their time is coming much quicker than it needs to. Frogs tell us the story best, you know, and you know, we should really be conscious of these little messengers. They have semi-permeable skin and unprotected eggs. The reliance on external temperatures to regulate their own is one of the reasons that these species have been dying off. The ecosystem is out of balance, and they're dying in droves. And because they're dying, they're like the canary in the coal mine. They're basically letting us know, you're next. You know, we can't handle it. Good luck, humans, because it's going to be much harder on you. And so we are in a point where, by looking at the environment around us, we know it's not adapting quickly enough. Some people say climate change is good for us. Wow, where do you address this statement? Especially when you think about human cost of a warming climate. If you think about climate change right now, look at all the people that are migrating from one part of the world to another. Forced migration. They're leaving areas where they can't grow food, there isn't water, where the economy is failing, where there's crop failures, drought, floods, and fires that wipe out the livelihood and homes of people. People are forced to migrate. And we can look at our own southern border here in the United States and see a lot of that migration is really because of climate change, because their economies are failing. They can't live in an area where they can't support themselves. They also become vulnerable to human trafficking because now they're forced labor, their human rights are being abused, they're adrift, and many people are taking advantage of them. But let's look at the overall economic impact of this real quickly. The global economy could lose, and are you ready for this, $23 trillion to climate change by 2050. $23 trillion to climate change by 2050. That will place the world in an economic recession that is going to be very difficult to get out of. You know, losing that much money out of the system. And you say, well, how is that lost? A reconstruction. Look at every time a hurricane hits Florida or California or someplace. Well, how much does it cost to fix that when there's a wildfire that wipes out communities? When crops fail, that all adds up. Think of that as being sustained, not just a once in 5 year thing, but happening constantly on a repeated basis over and over and over again. You know, we're going to have a hard time sustaining people. So some people say, okay, maybe climate change is real. Great, I'm glad you can join us. But there's nothing to be done about it. It's too late. Well, that kind of fatal attitude really is not true. We don't have time to waste, but it's not too late. If government, working with business and individuals like us, begin to take some action, and it might be drastic in some ways, we can do something about the warming that's taking place and stop this at 1.5 centigrade, where the Paris Accords, the Paris Agreement, has said we need to be in order to be able to start managing this again. We can get control. We still have the ability to do so now. But at the way the acceleration is taking place right now, we don't have a lot of time to waste. We really have to get serious about this. That's why we need to talk about this. We need to have a discussion. So we can enjoy the conversation about climate change. We really can. We can make it something that is important. You know, you think about, what should we talk about? Let's talk about the climate. Now, we should avoid trying to fit in every point about it, because then it gets into a situation of, well, what about this and what about that? You know, let's just talk about the obvious. You know, the climate's changing around us. You know, doesn't it bother you that it's 115 degrees outside? That you could get second-degree burns if you fall on the sidewalk? Doesn't it bother you that, you know, 8 inches of rain fell in an hour and the streets are flooded and there's a power failure that's taking place? You know, sure, we should talk about that. And I think every time we talk about it, we can then think about, what should we do? How can we work together? We get closer to that point where we're not arguing about why it's happening. We're talking about what action we should take. The other thing is, we need to ask questions rather than lecture to people, and seek to understand the experiences that led people to their beliefs. We all grew up in different environments, and we all grew up with different parents and different expectations, different generations. So, you know, it's good to ask questions. You know, the basic questions will help us to determine how people believe what they believe. And obviously, different generations have different contexts to work with. So when we're talking intergenerationally, we need to understand that the information people are using is based on their experiences and what they were told or what they thought was important. You know, I'm from a generation where, you know, the automobile was promoted as a mode of transportation. Mass transit was essentially eliminated. And we were taught that, you know, gasoline stations and fuel and so forth was good for us, and that we could count on that as a reliable source. We were burning coal, you know. But we need to listen and show people we've been heard. Verify that you have heard them correctly also. When we're ready to make our point, we may not be listening to their point. And so it's good to lay back, listen to what they've had to say, take it in, and then think about, what did they just say to me? You know, and verify it and say, so you're saying that climate change is a conspiracy, a hoax. It's all made up. It's not whatever. Is that what you're saying? Okay, I heard you. You know, and let's talk about that. How did you come to that? What gives you that authority to say that? Again, we can correctly understand the person by listening to them. We're also giving them a chance to express what they really feel. This is active listening. Active listening is hard to do. There's a lot to it. You know, some of it is using open questions, some of it's using closed questions. We need to avoid prejudice. We need to reflect. We need to probe. We need to avoid as many interruptions and distractions as possible. We have to look at the nonverbal behavior of the person. We have to signal encouragement for the person to keep talking, to tell us what they think. We have to listen for feelings. Are they really passionate about it? Are they angry? We have to show interest, and then we need to summarize it as much as we can for the person so that they know we listened to them, that we took it in. The other thing is, we have to tell our story, how I became or how you became engaged, and why you're concerned about the environment, why you're concerned about the climate, you know, why it's important to you. Share that with the other person. They may not necessarily appreciate it, but we need to tell our story. We need to let them know that, you know, like them, we're concerned also, but we have another view of it. The other thing is, we need to talk about action. We need to really address climate change from a standpoint of, it is important to deal with now, not in the future, and not to assume that there's going to be this long timeline in the future. We have to learn from the conversation. We have to learn from the dialogue that we have with other people. Whether it's an individual, whether it's a group, it doesn't make a difference. That dialogue is really important. And once we learn about the person's views, taking action becomes the next step. We can ask them, well, what do you think we should do? And giving them that opportunity then opens the door for, well, you've expressed your ideas. Let me tell you what I think. You know, that dialogue just took place. The exchange of ideas just took place. That's powerful, because even if the person may not accept your message now, they're going to have to think about it. And they may even come back to it and accept it and own it at some time in the future. But we don't expect, and we shouldn't expect, that they're going to remarkably right in front of you say, oh, now I believe you. Oh, geez, you've opened my eyes. That's probably not going to happen. They're probably going to leave telling you, well, okay, buddy, you keep believing that, you know, whatever, you know. So what I'd like to end with is just this whole point of view that climate change is real, and we need to communicate about this. And we need to make this something that's personal. Probably starting with people that you think you can sit down with is a good point where you need to go. But keep in mind, if you're going to pick people that inevitably it's going to lead to a bad argument or something, you may want to think about that more clearly. You know, arguing your point, having them argue their point, probably isn't going to lead to anything than you're going to just go to polar points on this. They're going to become more entrenched. You're going to become more entrenched. We don't want to see that happen. You know, offer the opportunity to talk about it, see if it can develop into a conversation. And if it can, then go into it with the idea of exchange. What I think is real critical here is that you also find people who believe like you in these things and talk with them, because it's good to know what other people have to share and think about and what their point is in this whole thing. Again, this is a important conversation that we need to have. You know, and my friends here, if I could talk to them, if I could talk to my friends, the frogs, I'd say, geez, I'm really sorry that we're putting your climate at risk for you. I'd like to see you in the future, and I hope that you all don't disappear on us. Maybe we can learn from the frogs. Maybe we can learn from nature. And simply put, maybe we can become better humans and actually better stewards of our environment, not just for the frogs, but for all of us, for our children and grandchildren, and for all the other animals and trees that exist in this world that we live in. And we will all benefit from it. We'll all be beneficiaries. We don't want to end up like the dinosaurs, extinct. We don't want some future looking at our remains as some kind of source of fuel or something. We certainly hope that we learn from their mistakes, from the kinds of things that took place in that. But keep in mind, they really didn't have much time to change. And either do the frogs. So let's work together. Let's get there together. Thank you so much. This is A to Zig. And I hope that you're able to be a benefit to everybody around you. Take care.